I want to introduce our keynote speaker, and I have to tell a quick little story in doing that because I was talking to my daughter, Stacy, this summer, and I was telling her about the symposium and saying, you know, we really need to find a really outstanding keynote speaker. And my daughter's in New York. She's in graduate school at Columbia, and she works for Nike as well. And she said, you know what, I was at this event recently, and I heard this fellow, Miguel McKelvey, speaking, and he's with an outfit called WeWork, and I think they just raised like $1 billion, and they really are a really fast-growing, dynamic company. And he, in particular, spoke very well about what they're doing to empower entrepreneurs in these urban settings, and they're like in 17 different cities and so forth. So she was telling me all this stuff. I didn't know about WeWork before this conversation with my daughter, but the more I learned about it, I said, wow, this is really an impactful company that's doing work in the urban space, empowering urban entrepreneurs. And so I said, you know what, I would love to have this guy come, but I don't know him. And my daughter has like 61,000 followers on Instagram, and she said, Miguel is following me. And so she sent him a direct message to say, would you be interested in participating in my father's seminar? And he said, you know, I think I would. So we talked and we hooked it up. And so, you know, that's the first big indication of the power of social media for me. It was a tangible thing. But Miguel is the co-founder and chief creative officer of WeWork, where he directs all architecture, design, and construction activities. WeWork is a co-working and community building company. They have co-working spaces, really high-level, well-designed co-working spaces in a number of different cities. And Miguel is a multidisciplinary designer and entrepreneur with diverse experience in architecture, design, construction management, and web development. Prior to WeWork, he created the design framework and led the national retail rollout for American Apparel, which was 170 stores. And he was involved in the early stage development of several companies, including Green Desk, Barrel 3, Versation, and English Baby. And Miguel earned his BA in architecture from the University of Oregon. So I'm pleased and happy to introduce Miguel McKelvey as your keynote speaker.
Hello, good morning. You guys are far away, so I'm going to stand as close as I can. You know, I'm an outsider to Detroit. Obviously, I'm not from here, but I've been coming here relatively regularly, at least once a year, it seems, since about 2005, when I started working with American Apparel. And, you know, as an outsider, I have to say that it's a pretty extraordinary time for you guys and for the people who are here, because, you know, in 2005, I was coming here looking for a location for an American Apparel store. And I tried really hard. I met with all the people I could to try to understand, you know, is there a place, is there a location? We did a lot of non-traditional locations for retail back then, and we were working hard to try to find a place where we could sort of, you know, ignite something. And it was tough. Unfortunately, I couldn't convince anyone that there was a certain street that was about to turn over, that was about to come that next spot. So we ended up doing stores in Royal Oak and Ann Arbor and East Lansing, and it always felt like, you know, I had some regret related to that, because I felt like even one store like American Apparel coming to Detroit could have been something, and who knows what would have followed. But the thing that's amazing now is that, you know, looking at it and coming here, the energy level is totally different. The dedication, the conversations that are happening, the conversations that I'm having with people now they're so much different, and it's really exciting. So from a brand perspective, you know, as you guys probably all know, Detroit is strong. And, you know, I think one of the really interesting things for the people that are here is to figure out how to balance that feeling that, you know, people from the outside are looking at Detroit as a place of, you know, change and hope and potentially innovation and creation. And you know, there's people in Brooklyn who think Detroit is the coolest place in the world, where, Brooklyn for a long time has been that sort of symbolic place of creativity and creation. So there's something good happening, but at the same time, you guys want Detroit to be built from the inside. You want the good stuff to come from the insiders, not from the outsiders, coming here. So there's a balance to be struck. So I wish I could say more about that. I certainly don't know enough to qualify to speak about what's happening here. But what I did want to talk about is a little bit more of a personal story. I do have some stuff about WeWork, but like a lot of that stuff is online, and I'm sure there's some good slides here. But I just wanted to talk more about for me what entrepreneurship means and sort of what a difference it can make. I grew up in a small town in Oregon called Eugene, which is where the University of Oregon is. And most people didn't even know about the University of Oregon until Nike was started there. And so when I was a kid in Eugene, it was a pretty depressing place. All the storefronts downtown were closed because the timber industry had made a lot of towns in Oregon sort of booming in the 70s, but in the 80s, a lot of the towns just sort of shut down. And so I grew up in a place where there really didn't feel like there was anything cool going on. It was like you could ride through the downtown on your bike and literally not see a person. So on a much smaller scale, there was a lot of similarities. But Nike started and they located a store in the downtown area, literally like the size of the stage. And that was like the one incredibly inspiring thing that was happening. To be able to walk into that store and see the releases, every quarter, every 6 months, every year of the new Nikes that came out, for me as a kid was really it was my favorite place in town. My mom, I said this last night, but she would sort of use that store as a babysitter. She would drop me off. I'd go sit in the store for 2 hours and just take each one off the shelf, pretending like I could afford it, and then put it back and then move on to the next one. And so it was as a representative thing, for me it always became the thing that when you're a young person in the city, you need these beacons of hope. You need these things that tell you anything is possible. And so obviously to watch Nike grow from being just a little shop in town to be actually a massive company was a pretty incredible thing to happen. And so I think that for me it was always sort of this thing that it sort of gave me the idea that anything was possible. So I studied architecture. I was my dream was to move to New York and become an architect. And I don't know where that came from, just wherever, just bubbled up sometime that New York was the place for me. And but before I went, I graduated from school, and one of my best friends was living in Japan, in Tokyo, and he was like, "Why don't you come over for a vacation?" And I was like, "Well, that's a cool idea. I'll go over to Tokyo. It's not common to have a friend living in a place that far away." So I went over to visit him, and we were hanging out. This is gonna make me sound old, but at the time there was this TLC song called "No Scrubs." It was really popular. Some of you guys may know it, but the language in that song is confusing for people who are learning English or who want to learn English, right? What's a scrub was a pretty complicated question. But we were the guys to answer it, right? Because we're the Americans. We were out at literally at a sushi bar. They played that song so much. You would go into a department store, a sushi bar, a club, it was everywhere. And so everyone wanted to know. And so we saw an opportunity, and it sounds crazy that a song would be the start of a business model, but that's all it takes. If your mindset is hey, I see a problem, I want to solve it, and we were literally if we can figure out how to replicate us and answer that question. I don't know how many million people there are in Tokyo, but there's a lot. And we thought there's a business there if we can be that link between what people learn in school in their English classes that they're really hungry for, and then that real, authentic sort of American, understanding of the language. So we created a company called English Baby in a tiny apartment, having barely understanding, we couldn't even figure out how to collect, we had a business model, but we didn't know how to collect payments. And the way that they paid for stuff back there was that back then there was no online, this is before PayPal and all that other stuff. So what would happen is you would sign up on the website, and then to pay your bill, you'd have to go to a convenience store like a 7-Eleven, and you'd actually give money to like the person at the front desk at the counter at the 7-Eleven, and then they would hold it, and then I would have to go around Tokyo and pick it up in an envelope and like say like, hey, I'm here to collect the like $2 that this person just paid for their membership at English Baby. And I did that. I was traveling all around town, and I was willing to do that because it was like incredible experience. It was something that for me, like regardless of what happened, whether it was a successful business or not, it was an amazing experience to learn from and to grow from. And I think that that's kind of like the perspective you've got to have, is like, it's not necessarily about some huge success, like, I'm going to become a millionaire or whatever, but especially when you're young and you're figuring it out, you got to feel like you're a sponge. You got to feel like you're going to try anything, you're going to do everything, you're going to push yourself to do things that are outside of your comfort zone, because those will become the learning experiences that will help you in the future to do, hopefully many other things. So to fast forward a little bit, I still had the dream to be the architect in New York. I was running a company that was about 20 people in Portland, English Baby, which was a cool little company. But I still had this need to go to New York, and so I started applying for jobs as an architect. But I hadn't worked in architecture for 4.5 years, and so no one was responding to my resume. I also said I lived in Oregon, so no one wants to hire someone from all the way across the country. So at one point, one of my friends was like, hey, I don't think anyone's going to respond to you, but you should, lie and say that you live in New York and see what happens. So I altered my resume to say my friend who lived in Queens address, and literally that one switch changed the responses. I immediately got some interviews granted, and so I went to New York. I got on a plane, go to a job interview. The first time I ever went to Brooklyn was for one of these interviews, and I got off the subway, and it was like, this is Dumbo in 2004, which Dumbo has become one of the most sort of expensive neighborhoods in Brooklyn, but at the time it was still a lot more rough. And I went into a building where there was like, I took pictures of it, and it was like, really beat down. The walls were, like scrawled with graffiti, and there was like, the directory was like Sharpie on the wall saying like, 203 that way, 205 that way. And there was a whole bunch of, strange businesses in there, some shady, some, who knows. But that experience, that exploration, that feeling that I was doing something exciting was sort of worth that adventure, was worth that risk, that fear of being there. So I go into the office, I'm expecting like New York architecture firm, it's gonna be like all these cool guys, like people dressing in cool clothes, and like, so I'd gone to TJ Maxx the night before and bought like pleated pants and like wingtips and like a button-down shirt that I tucked in. And I walked in, I'm thinking this is like New York architecture, and I walk in and it's like two dudes in like jeans and t-shirts. And I was like, totally like threw me back. Like, this is not at all what I expected. And then, they were like, hey, we got this small firm. We've got a couple of projects. Like, they had one little house, and they were like, we can offer you a job. It's going to be $10 an hour, and you'll be like the lowest guy of the three of us. So you're going to kind of do whatever we don't want to do. And so I was going from being like the boss of like 20 people to like Brooklyn, knowing nobody, in this really shabby, crappy building that was like, on the edge of my comfort zone. And I was like, I'm in. Like, I want to do this. I'm like, all right, I'm ready. So he goes, okay, cool. Why don't you start tomorrow? I was like, well, actually, I had like a vacation plan because I was gonna go, visit some, because I had nothing. I didn't bring any clothes with me. He thought I lived in Queens, but I still lived in Oregon. I had a full apartment and everything. So I negotiated with them to start instead of that Thursday, which was the next day, to start on Monday. And so I literally like flew back that night, went back, packed up. My mom came up, packed up my whole apartment, put it in the back of her car, and I flew to New York that Sunday night with like a duffel bag, and that was like 11 years ago. And so I started there on Monday morning, and literally just by incredible chance, that firm ended up getting the contract to do the American Apparel stores, and that started with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and all of a sudden it just exploded into an endless number. And so, because I had business experience but very little architecture experience, I kind of became more of a business person, a developer of retail stores. And so, you know, it's just one of those things where I went from, like, literally on the first day, I was like, I fixed the sink because it had a drip. I like organized a bunch of notebooks. I had to go to the hardware store and buy some like shelf brackets to like hang up some shelves in the office, and I was willing to do that because I felt like it was building towards something bigger. Like I felt like everything that I did, every small step was going to be towards something more meaningful in the future. And so, you know, within the span of about 3 months, everything had changed. I had gone from being like really the lowest person doing whatever kind of crappy work someone wanted me to do, to being responsible for my own projects, you know, a few $1 million budget to build out a store in Brooklyn. And then from there, I was traveling the world. I went to pretty much every city in the United States to look for American Apparel locations. I was, you know, in London and Tokyo and Paris. And so it just sort of like, for me, it was a real important thing to go through that process of just being willing to let everything go. All of my sort of expectations, all my, you know, feelings like perception from my parents, from my friends, from everybody about what I was doing, and just do what felt, you know, right for me, what felt true to who I was. And so, similar thing happened with WeWork, and again, the whole slides are gone and everything, but I was in this building in Brooklyn, and you know, it was a cool building. It was full of like a lot of businesses doing cool stuff. A lot of people who were like there was this woman I remember who just loved hats, you know, and she was like, I'm gonna become a hat maker. And I mean, who wears hats? I mean, some people do, but she was like, I'm all about hats. And so she started a company that was, you know, making like the coolest hats in Brooklyn. And, you know, she had a tiny little space, like, you know, the size of half of the stage. And she was all about it, you know, she came in every day, she busted her ass to like, you know, make the coolest hats that she could make. And I think that sort of spirit was so apparent amongst all of these people, but there was nothing that was helping them. There was no, you know, when the internet went down in that building, no one cared. Like the landlord wasn't helping you. So this woman making hats, or whoever the business was, would spend, you know, half their day trying to solve their internet problem. They're on the phone with Verizon or whoever, AT&T, trying to solve problems. And so what we realized was that for a lot of people, for entrepreneurs, for startups, they spend a lot of time doing stuff that really doesn't help them grow their business, that's not core to what they want to do. And so we felt like if we can create an environment where people are supported in, you know, following their dream, following their passion, that it would be super fulfilling for us, and it would also be really helpful for them. So about 2007, we started, you know, the first company that did this called Green Desk, and then about a year later, we sold that and started again 2 years later. And so WeWork became really a home for people who are, you know, in that mindset of like, I want to bring something new to the world. I want to do something for me. I want to find a way to follow my passion and my dream. And it's been an incredible run because, you know, since we started, the feedback and the number of people who have come to us, the number of amazing employees, team members that have come to us, you know, the number of investors that supported us, like, I forgot the number, but I think we've raised like close to $1 billion, like with the B, like that's crazy. And the reason for that is because people like many of you have changed their mindset. They've said, I'm not going to take the easy road. I'm not going to like get a job in, you know, doing something I don't care about, but rather I'm going to make a decision to take the hard path, to make the leap towards entrepreneurship, towards doing something that I'm passionate about. And because we've created an environment that makes that easier, we're trying to satisfy the demand. I mean, we have about 33,000 people, 35,000 people across the world now. And a lot of people will say, oh, that's so many people, that's big. And I'm like, 35,000, there are like 30 million people right now who are in this mindset, and they're everywhere. everyone is changing from this, feeling of sort of having a job just to like pay the bills to like having a job to do something that they care about and that's meaningful to them. So we think it's just the start of a major global shift, of a revolution, and I think that the reason why we're particularly excited about Detroit is that, again, where you may not feel it if you're here as much as we feel it from the outside, but we feel like Detroit is a real sort of symbolic city for that sort of entrepreneur story and for that entrepreneur spirit. So we think that it's not going to be long before things really, or I think they're already happening, but that they continue to happen, and that all these things that people are talking about are really going to come true, and that it's going to be held up as an example of an incredible renewal and change through the effort and talent and passion of people who were determined to make a difference. So I'm happy to hopefully play a tiny part in that. And I'm super excited to spend more time here and to learn as much as I can to do a part, to do my part. So I don't know how much time we have left. Thanks a lot for having me. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything about anything.
I've been asked to speak at a thing in Chicago in 2 weeks, and the topic they asked me to speak on, which I went ahead and changed, was saying the upside of gentrification. And